Thought Media Network proudly presents a weekly exploration of various spiritual practices with renowned spiritual authors, coaches, teachers, and Dr. Tracy Brown, RScP.
And now, here's Tracy.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here, and I am so glad that you have decided to join in today's poetry, prayer, and spiritual practice. Every Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, I get the opportunity to check in with myself about poetry and how it can be used as a spiritual practice, or how poetry inspires us into deeper, more effective spiritual practice. Prayer, that rock, that solid rock that grounds so many of us. And there's so many different kinds of prayer. So some weeks we really focus on prayer, and all the time we're talking about spiritual practices, what's working for each one of us, what we are currently inspired by in our spiritual practice, what we may have discarded and why, and what tips we have for others. And every week, I say I get to check in with myself, but I also often learn from and am inspired by some of the guests that agree to come on and share their insights with me and with you and with the world. And today is no exception. I expect this to be a most fabulous conversation. And for those of you who have watched the show on a regular basis, you know already Tracy does not do scripts. Tracy and her guests do not sit down and write an outline before. The goal is that we have a conversation and you get to eavesdrop on that conversation, or you get to participate in that conversation, because if you are watching live especially, feel free to write a comment, a reaction, or a question in the chat or in the comments if you are on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll bring that into the conversation as well. Already we've got some folks jumping in to let us know that they are present. Welcome, Fiona. Always love having you with us from Geneva, Switzerland. And Wayne, always love having you with us and your comments added into the chat from Calgary. Every time I say that, I stop. Is it Calgary? Is it Calgary? Is it what's the real pronunciation? Because I've had a couple of Canadians say that Americans mess it up on a regular basis. But we are here, and my guest today is Rev Michelle Medrano, and my habit is not to read the bio with all the things that would impress you if I read them, because I want to get into the conversation. But I always take 3 or 4 or 5 things that I know that are random facts about my guest. So let's do 5 things that I know about Michelle Medrano. Number 1, Michelle Medrano for the last 10 years has served as lead minister, or a minister in leadership roles at MileHi Church in Lakewood, Colorado. She was licensed as a minister well before that, and maybe we'll ask her a little bit about that, because she's actually been a minister for more than 30 years. Number 3, random fact about Reverend Michelle Medrano. Michelle Medrano is one of the people I consider a role model for myself in terms of being fully engaged in her local community, where she is all the time, and finding ways to be of service beyond the local spiritual community in Centers for Spiritual Living recognized by many as a gifted speaker. And I recently got to be reminded of that by watching and hearing her speak at an event that we both attended. And so it's no surprise that she is one of the people who teaches our ministerial students homiletics, or the art and skill of preparing and presenting a meaningful and impactful talk. And number five, now many of you who know Reverend Michelle know that she is married to Ken, and they are just so delightful together. But I'm here to tell you, as my number five thing, Reverend Michelle has a boyfriend. Her boyfriend's name is not Ken. Her boyfriend's name is Hafiz. And we're going to talk a lot about Hafiz in our time together. So welcome, Reverend Michelle.
Thank you, Tracy. Very nice facts. That was great.
I'm not one to gossip. I don't think I have a reputation for starting rumors, but with that last random fact about Michelle Medrano, it will be interesting to see how that becomes a rumor within mutual circles. So I shared five things, but what other things, if any, do you want to share that would really help people know what you want them to know about you?
Well, I think those were really good five things, but I think we are in a mutual admiration society, as I have huge admiration for you and your leadership, and I watch you do what you do in your local community and for our Centers for Spiritual Living, and have greatly admired you and appreciated you, and just look forward to having time with you like this.
I love that we're not having a conversation about business,
Yes.
right? And we're not having a conversation today about there's this project and here's the deadline and what are we going to do to get to it? That we get to just hang out and talk about spiritual practice and a lot about poetry and how it impacts our spiritual growth or the application of spiritual principles.
Yes.
So I I'm gonna do a little bit of a cliffhanger. We'll get to Hafiz, Hafiz, however.
You say Hafez, I say Hafiz, you say.
Right. We're going to get to that in a minute. Let's spend a
Okay.
few minutes just talking about like what's up for you in your spiritual practice right now. Like what's really feeding you or guiding you in your spiritual practice right now because it changes.
It does, and I'm in a very unusual experience. I was actually just telling someone at brunch today a little bit about this. I discovered the world of virtual reality recently. I've always been a tech person, and I thought, those white things that people wear and you can't see their eyes, but they wear them. I've always thought they were mostly for gaming. And my nephew had one, and I tried it at Christmas time, and it was like, I'm not a gamer. Fine, have fun. It was kind of interesting, different world, no big deal. But then a colleague of mine shared that there are meditation apps in this virtual reality. So I was very intrigued by that. And so I went and I got myself one, and I found the app, the main app, I think, that I prefer there. There are a number of them. It's called Trip, and it takes you into these virtual environments that are just beautiful. And my soul, a huge part of spiritual practice for me, is the encountering of deep, profound beauty before, during, and after my practice. I always feel like beauty in its many varieties, art, nature, music, my own inner sense of the beauty of life, are doorways to God. And so that the fact that this virtual reality provides this beautiful environment that I feel like I'm in, not just looking at or observing, but I'm in it. And then there's beautiful music. There are a number of ways that you can use it. And so I've been delving into virtual reality to support me in my meditation practice and my spiritual practice.
I love that. And I'm sure I am not the only person in this very moment that's like intrigued,
Hmm.
pulled in, and making a no virtual reality trip meditation. Like, okay, I might have been planning to finish a report later today, but
Oh,
I might have to reprioritize this.
yes, yes. A little research or something.
Yeah, and I always like to ask that question because so often when I'm teaching a class, especially, and students in the class will ask a question that's worded in a way that reveals that they assume there's only one way or there is a best way. Or
Yes.
if you do these one or two spiritual practices in this sequence on this schedule, then, everything is going to be fine. So I like to remind people that no, there was probably about an 8 or 9 year period where, yes, I journaled every morning, but at a certain point, I realized it was automatic, and what I was journaling, what I was writing, wasn't as rich.
Hmm.
And I switched up my morning practice to do something else. And this year, it has been like every 3 months or so, my inner being is, yeah, what you've been doing is great, but we want to do this now.
Yes. I think that that makes a lot of sense to me because there are people that I know who are um, they're very much run by their daily routine. They're the kind of people who likely will have the same lunch or the same breakfast every day, or they will take the same walk around a block. And for them, that is, it gives them security to have that sameness. And every one of us has some of that to some degree, but then some of us have this huge desire for variety, to try new things, to shake things up. And for me, I have a life where I just don't do the same thing every day. I don't do it at the same time. I don't see the same people. I don't go the same places. My life is just filled with variety. And for me, that works. And part of the reason I like this virtual reality meditation is that there are so many ways to use it. There's not just one meditation or one way to do it. And there are also, I've discovered other fun moving things of playing games that are about moving my body and music. I've watched concerts in the virtual reality and just been in awe, like I'm right there in the concert with them, and just have felt my heart just come alive with awe and wonder. And a few times I have seen things in that virtual world where I've said to myself, this is what it's like when you cross over to the other side, I think. The
Mm.
colors and the tunnel and the scenes and the feeling. It's like, oh, ah, ah, yes.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah, maybe. You know how in TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, like there's a whole category of people in this generation that have become influencers. I mean, that
Yes.
we officially refer to as influencers. I read an article a couple of weeks ago where they had done surveys with teens who were in the last couple of years of high school or the first year of college, and asking them just what
What
kind of
kind of
jobs
God
did
did
they
they
think.
think?
We're getting feedback. Let's and what kind of job did they think that they wanted to have, as they matured? And more like for the first time ever in career prep research, the idea of like that is an actual job to be an influencer, and they're going to design their life around that. And so what makes me think of that based on what you were saying is that maybe Michelle Medrano is going to be the new thought influencer for marketing and demonstrating how to integrate virtual reality into the practice of universal spiritual principles. I see it really clearly.
Yeah, no, I can be an influencer in that direction. That sounds good.
So let me test for feedback again.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're good.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So I one final thing about spiritual practice, and then we'll go to Hafiz. And that is, and I've said this before, but it comes to mind for me again a while ago now, 10, 15 years ago now. My whole thing about spiritual practice got a fire lit under it from Reverend Lee Woolak. And he was talking, I don't remember if it was a class or a Sunday talk, but, or if we were just having a conversation, but somehow he made a comment about tithing your awake time in
Mm,
spiritual practice.
mm-hmm.
And I think that conversation not only inspired me because I was like, oh, tithe time, tithe talent, tithe, money, of course, but I never really thought about tithing my awake time into spiritual practice before that day. And I think that for me also was the time when it unlocked the idea that spiritual practice had a box to fit and that it needed to be the same every day or at the same
Mm,
time.
mm,
Because if I was going to tithe throughout my day, or even if I was going to say at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, I'm going to spend 2 hours in spiritual practice, like I wouldn't be able to do it that way every day. And that opened up the opened my mind to begin to think about what are all the different ways I am nourishing myself with spiritual practice,
mm.
and how can I do it in 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there, as well as how can I do it for an extended time.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I love that.
And for me, spiritual, a big part of my spiritual practice is related to poetry. So I
Yes.
am curious about why you have gifted Hafez with the title of your boyfriend.
Well, there's many reasons. I would say the first one is that Hafez and Rumi was one of his teachers, I believe, they speak of God as almost a lover, and they will, or even of themselves sometimes, as a lover of God, not a lover from a sexual place, but a lover from a heart place, a presence, a love of God, a reverence for God that they want to depart and communicate about. And I feel like their poetry leads me into my heart so deeply and profoundly that I do feel like a lover of Hafez. And so therefore I have sort of jokingly called him my boyfriend.
Well, I sure have been a fan, a real fan of a lot, well, both Rumi and Hafez poetry. Um, and Rumi for a long time before I ever read anything or heard about Hafez. And then when someone was doing an event and they were reading Hafez poetry, and I was like, I'm kicking Rumi to the curb.
Yeah.
I'm done. And that lasted for maybe a year or so. And then, I went back and got reattached to all my Rumi favorites. And,
Yes.
and then I got exposed to Rabindranath Tagore.
Oh, yes.
And for a while, then I didn't read any Rumi or Hafez, but I keep going back to
Mhm.
Hafez. So I know you have some favorites. Do you want to share one?
I do, but I also want to point out, if you don't know it or some of your listeners, this book, Love Poems to God. Do you have this book? Yes. And it's been translated by Daniel Ladinsky, who's one of the most popular translators. But there are a whole bunch of these mystical poets in this book, Love Poems to God. We've got Rabia, St. Francis, Rumi, Meister Eckhart, St. Thomas Aquinas, Hafiz, St. Catherine of Siena, Kabir, Mira, St. Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross, Tukaram, a whole bunch of wonderful poets that if you're looking for inspiration on your spiritual path, and of course I've hearted and dog-eared so many of these poems by all sorts of poets, and I have found that at times when I have pain in my heart, or I'm confused, or I feel lost, just to sit and read these poems awakens my heart in a very profound way, a very profound way. And so I have this book also, which is I Heard God Laughing, also a Ladinsky book. I believe that Dr. Kathy Ann Lewis introduced Hafez to me. And so I have this one all marked up with my favorite poems for sure. And my absolute favorite poem by Hafez is in the back of this book about the love of God and happiness. It's about happiness. He says it's called Several Times in the Last Week. Ever since happiness heard your name, it has been running through the streets trying to find you. And several times in the last week, God Himself has even come to my door asking me for your address. Once I said, God, I thought you knew everything. Why are you asking me where your lovers live? And the beloved replied, Indeed, Hafez, I do know everything, but it is fun playing dumb once in a while, and I love intimate chat and the warmth of your heart's fire. Maybe we should make this poem into a song. I think it has potential. How does this refrain sound? For I know it as it is a truth. Ever since happiness heard your name, it has been running through the streets trying to find you, and several times in the last week, God Himself has come to my door, so sweetly asking for your address, wanting the beautiful warmth of your heart's fire. I just love that.
I Yeah, I love that too. And part of what I love about it is it's so down to earth, like,
Yes.
right? And sometimes we need that, like a few weeks ago I did a talk, and we used the song Ain't No Mountain High Enough
Oh, yeah.
as kind of but my whole thing was, what if God was saying or singing this to you? There's
Hmm.
no mountain high enough to keep me away from you. I'm here for you. I'm here with you, right here.
Yes.
You, right? There's no river wide enough.
Hmm.
And so that poem by Hafez is kind of that same thing. Like, yeah, like God is asking about you.
Hmm.
We could be happy. So what do you love about it?
Well, I love that Hafez relates himself. I think it's almost like a treatment, a spiritual mind treatment, like we teach here. The poem is because it feels like God is running through the streets and been trying to find you, maybe something that you're trying to manifest, but goes to Hafez, who's a known mystic. And so when we do prayer in our teaching, we deepen into the part of us that we may not always be totally conscious of, but is absolutely plugged in and is experiencing the presence and the warmth of the fire that is within us. And so it's almost like it's connecting with that. And then at the end of the poem, it's basically saying, And God wants the warmth of your fire too, your heart's fire. So it's acknowledging the power and the presence that's everywhere and is right where I am. And so it's almost very much akin to the way that we pray, which I love. And it's a delightful image to also just imagining the search that God is simply having for each one of us just as we are, which is so beautiful and so touching. And I love taking songs like you just talked about and poems and art and feeling that yearning for the presence that God is to await upon us to go, hello, I see you, there you are. Yes.
It does help us remember there is no separation.
Yeah.
Right? There really is no separation except the stories we make up in our minds,
Mm-hmm.
and that we are giving as well as receiving, right? That spirit is just integrated into. Uh, and of course, with Hafez, because you read that, or I hear you read it, and it makes you laugh, right?
Yes.
It's just so real. So not this intellectual, amorphous, unreachable, untouchable concept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he does have some poems, as I'm sure you know, that have a few very like silly things in it. Like one of his most popular poems, he talks about walking behind a farting camel, and it's how horrible that is, kind of thing. But he also has poems which I love about when our hearts get broken, when we haven't, when we've missed the mark, when we haven't been able to connect with God. He has this other poem that I love called "I Know the Way You Can Get." That's really beautiful. I'd like to read it to you too, if you don't mind.
I was just gonna say, do you want to read it?
Yeah.
I don't think I know this one.
He says, I know the way you can get when you have not had a drink of love. Your face hardens, your sweet muscles cramp. Children become concerned about a strange look that appears in your eyes, which even begins to worry your own mirror and nose. Squirrels and birds sense your sadness and call an important conference in a tall tree. They decide which secret code to chant to help your mind and soul. Even angels fear that brand of madness that arrays itself against the world and throws sharp stones and spears into the innocent and into oneself. Oh, I know the way you can get. If you have not been out drinking love, you might rip apart every sentence your friends and teachers say, looking for hidden clauses. You might weigh every word on a scale like a dead fish. You might pull out a ruler to measure from every angle in your darkness the beautiful dimensions of a heart you once trusted. I know the way you can get if you have not had a drink from love's hands. That is why all the great ones speak of the vital need to keep remembering God, so you will come to know and see him as being so playful and wanting, just wanting to help. That is why Hafez says, bring your cup near me, for I am a sweet old vagabond with an infinite leaking barrel of light and laughter and truth that the beloved has tied to my back. Dear one, indeed, please bring your heart near me, for all I care about is quenching your thirst for freedom. All a sane man can ever care about is giving love. Oh, just give me the chills.
I don't know that one, but now I will.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that is so great.
Yeah.
And this idea of if you have not been drinking love, if you have not had a drink of love, if you have not been, drinking, how often in our lives, just going through our day to day, at the end of the day or at the end of that really long meeting, it feels like, oh, I haven't had a drink of love in a long time.
Hmm. And we crave it, we yearn for it in every moment. And I love how he he talks about how our face hardens. And then once that starts to happen, we have an impact on children and on nature, and even angels, other beings start to fear that that grumpiness that we become. And then we start to we get stuck in our head, is what I think he's talking about. We weigh every word, and we get caught up in the craziness of the mind and the brain and the thoughts. And that's why he's saying the vital need to keep remembering God, that we go back. And so I love what you talked about earlier about if you're tithing your spiritual practice, just like we might tithe our money, and maybe we give $20 here and $100 there, and overall it all counts, it all matters. But I know for me, as a beloved of God, there are times after I leave a meeting where I have to stop and do a little more spiritual practice to get myself recentered before I go out in the world, or else I become like that pebble in a pond, where the ripples that emanate out from me are not the highest and best ripples that I want to be emanating from me. And so it takes that spreading that practice through my day.
Yeah, it's just like marinating and going in a little bit deeper. Like I'm imagining myself ask others, um, what's been your drink of love today?
Ew,
Or
that's a good question.
yeah, or even I can hear myself forming the question, what would it feel like if you just had a little drink of love right now?
Yeah.
Right? It's like this is I don't know, and I probably have read it before, but it didn't hit me for whatever reason the way that it's hitting me now, because I think it has moved immediately into, oh, this is going to be in my top 10 list of the best poetry. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
it's one of my top 10. And one of the things that I like also about this, as you're talking about, have I drank enough, have I had a drink of love today, is that he positions himself in this poem as a sweet old vagabond with an infinite leaking barrel of light and laughter and truth that the beloved has tied to my back. And I like to think, Mary Morrissey, one of my favorite teachers, talks about it being a person of increase. I like to challenge myself and people who I get a chance to speak with in my messages or in my classes, to say, hey, look, yeah, we're doing this work because we want to feel better, we want to experience greater healing, greater well-being, we want to be happier. But ultimately, our ultimate way of serving the world is bringing that healed self forward, so that we can be, I think, like Hafiz here, and be that infinite leaking barrel of light and laughter and truth to the world, because that's how we help to contribute in a healing fashion to other people. That it's not the advice we give, it's not the skills we bring, it's not the talents, it's not the degrees, it's not that. It's, are you being that infinite light, laughter, and truth, and just being it and bringing it? And what if that's enough? What if that's more than enough? Wow, that inspires me to want to be that too.
What if that's enough? That's a question. Yeah. And if all of us were doing that,
Mm-hmm.
can you even imagine the collective experience? Because
Yeah.
we are all doing that individually, but in doing that, we're feeding the whole as well.
Yes, and it can feel a little bit awkward, I think, because we live in such a materialistic, focused world. I find it fascinating that in human relationships, we often feel like we're being most effective with the people we love if we're worrying about them, if we're giving them advice, if we're telling them how they should do things, if we're guiding them. And what I find in my personal life, in my relationships, and in other people's, is that relationships actually do really well without all that stuff. But what they most lack is what we're talking about here, is someone who'll just stand with you no matter what and just be light and laughter and love on your behalf and just be a presence for you. And if we could learn that as parents, as family members, as citizens, as spiritual community, just to stand with people in this energy, I think our world would be a lot better place too. Because I know that when people try to give me advice or input, it doesn't always feel all that helpful. Even if what they're saying is logical, it doesn't feel loving. It feels like you haven't seen me or even heard me. You're so busy trying to solve my problem.
Yeah, solve my problem or fix me
Fix me.
or make
Mhm.
me or make me in your image of who you think I should be,
Yes.
instead of like I'm I'm growing, expanding, expressing in this way, and it just kind of doesn't fit in this box that you see me in
No.
now.
No, and there's a key question that my husband and I have learned to ask each other as we go through our relationship. And sometimes it can be an assertive question. It can be as I come to him with my day or with what's going on in my life, I can say to him clearly, I'm going to tell you about this, and I really just need you to listen to me and just hear me and be with me so that he understands I'm not presenting him this problem to solve with me. And then there are other times when I can say clearly, can you help me come up with some good solutions for this? And he's learned, if I don't say those things, to be willing to say, now, what do you need most from me right now? Do you need solutions, or do you need me just to be here and hold the space for you? And even those kind of conversations in our relationships, and I'm talking business as well as personal. This is the case when we're interacting with each other in our business world, in our communities that we're part of, in our groups, can go a long way towards fostering true connection and healing and bringing forth all this stuff that I think Hafez and all of these mystic poets are talking about.
Yeah, I think that's a really good and practical example. And as you were sharing it about being clear and having shared clarity about what is what is needed or what is requested or
Mhm.
desired in a conversation. Um, as you were giving the example, I was thinking about conversations when I'm on a board of directors, conversations in the spiritual community where someone comes up and they give you some feedback. It's like sometimes I have to check, am I hearing this as a complaint? Am I hearing this as a request for me to do something? I'm hearing this just as an observer and witness to their experience. Like sometimes I have to take a breath, and
Yes.
sometimes I have to ask to be sure. And then, of
Yes.
course, there are those other times which I will admit to. There are those times when I don't think to slow down enough and make sure we're on the same page. And I jump in with however I think, like, and it can backfire in any way. I think they're just giving me generic feedback, and thank you. That's really good information for me to have. I'm so happy you shared that with me. And then they're upset because they actually wanted me to say what I'm going to do this with this information, and take it to this person or
Oh,
create this
yes.
program. I'm like, so it's not always that someone jumps in to try to fix. It's like we don't react and people want our input.
Hmm.
So, but the key relating back to the poem is how easy it is when you have poetry by Hafez, how easy it is to reevaluate the relationship that we have with the divine.
It is. Mhm.
I mean, that's the pattern that is coming forward for me. You're, are you in a conscious relationship with God, with spirit, with the divine, with the creator.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
what is that relationship?
And a lot of the things that we see with these mystic poets also is the removal of all boundaries around this that they have. Like one of his most famous poems that I love is called "Would You Think It Odd," where he talks about how God expresses through all churches and synagogues. And I think we see this in a lot of the mystics have often had an experience of unity, a unified experience. And whether a mystic, a prophet, a scientist, anybody who has had that experience will say there's a common denominator where boundaries fall away and all of these things that we use to separate us from each other just fall away. And while they are part of the dance of being human in the spiritual realm, they have absolutely no bearing upon the experience of the beloved seeking full expression through all. And this is beautiful and shocking and wonderful to be brought back to over and over again by these mystic poets and by Hafiz and by Rumi and others. I love Rumi's. Remember that poem that got quoted quite a bit about out beyond all ideas of right and wrong. There is a field, and I will meet you there. Yeah, that one. Oh, that one I was so taken up with and would often recite that before I would do my spiritual practice for anybody. If I was praying for people or I was going into a difficult situation and on a board or in a meeting that we were having, I would like imagine myself and all who were joining me. We were in that field together and we were there for the highest good of all concerned and in that mystic idea, because that's the place that oneness in God truly expresses itself most creatively and profoundly and without any limitation. And that's where I want to live from. I can't hear you at all. I think you're muted. Thank you.
The aspiration. I think that's one of the reasons that I read poetry and write poetry, because it allows me to get out of the pattern, whatever the pattern is, and move into the aspirational ideal
Mm-hmm.
for this applying spiritual principle in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I'm connecting again to that aspirational, beyond any right doing and wrongdoing. Yeah, I'll meet
Yes.
you there. Like, come on, let's go there. Let's not
Mm.
be stuck here. Let's go there.
Yes.
So, one of the most frustrating things about uh, poetry, prayer, and practice is that, I'm talking, I'm listening, and then I glance at the clock and go, what? Wait,
Oh,
how,
look at the
what?
clock.
Right. Like somebody came in and moved I would like to say, and moved the big hand or the little hand, like moved it, except that we're using digital clocks. So there was no moving of the big hand or the little
No,
hand.
no.
So, if you had to pick one more of your favorite Hafez poems, which one would it be?
I think I would go to that one I just talked about, the Would You Think It Odd poem. So I'll read that one as the final one.
Great.
He said, "Would you think it odd if Hafez said, 'I am in love with every church and mosque and temple and any kind of shrine, because I know it is there that people say the different names of the one God. Would you tell your friends I was a bit strange if I admitted I am indeed in love with every mind and heart and body? Oh, I am sincerely plumb crazy about your every thought and yearning and limb, because, my dear, I know that it is through these that you search for him.'" Yes, good Hafiz.
I do love that. I do love that. And I am hoping that there are people who will, watch the show and who've never heard of Hafiz before, and will be intrigued by the sharing of these poems and the conversation about Rumi and other mystic poets. So, if in case they weren't on at the beginning of the show, do you want to share a couple of references again where people can easily read more of that?
Sure. So one of the most popular translators for these mystic poems is Daniel Ladinsky, Ladinsky, and he wrote "I Heard God Laughing," renderings of Hafez, and this is only one of them. Love poems from God, 12 sacred voices from the East and the West. And if you look up Mr. Ladinsky, you will find those books on Amazon and in many of your favorite bookstores.
Yes, and if you have a local independent store that you love or a used
Yes.
bookstore, Ladinsky's work is often easily available in used books as well. So, Reverend Michelle, this is delightful. Oh my goodness.
Thank you so much. It's been fun to be with you.
Any final comments about poetry, prayer, or spiritual practice that are in your heart at this moment?
Well, I love the title of this because I think they can all go together so beautifully. And I would inspire and encourage the listeners to try poetry as a appetizer before your prayer and practice. Read some of this poetry and then do your meditation or your prayer work. And just see if you don't feel your heart opened a little bit more to the divine when you do it.
I love it. And I love you. Thank you so much for being with
Thank
us
you.
today.
Thank you. I love you too.
And we'll talk soon. So everybody, I hope that you got a little spark lit within you from this conversation. As you know, you can send the link to people who are in your professional or personal network, or to other people in spiritual community with you, if you think they too would be inspired by this conversation. My name is Tracy Brown, and I hope that you will mark your calendar to join me every Tuesday at noon Mountain Time right here on the New Thought Media Network for poetry, prayer, and practice.
Thanks for watching. Join us again next week. Or watch on demand at www.ntmedia.org or youtube.com/New Thought Media Network. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring. Learn more at www.ntmedia.org.